So types of hypothesis. Hypotheses are three types: descriptive hypothesis, relational hypothesis, explanatory hypothesis. Descriptive hypothesis is formulated to describe characteristic. The example for descriptive hypothesis is the present rate of unemployment in urban areas of India is 10%. We just mention the description in it. And relational hypothesis, it indicates the relationship between two variables. Like example, parents residing in urban areas spend more money on education on their children. And third one is explanatory hypothesis. What it does, it guide about the cause and effect relationship between two variables. And the example for it, when salaries increase, the spend on food item also increase. So this is what about the type of hypothesis. We'll understand another type of hypothesis, that is directional and non-directional. So see an example for directional and non-directional understanding of hypothesis. Suppose we are studying the impact of a new teaching method on the academic performance of boys and girls. So directional hypothesis says what? That the new teaching method will lead to a higher improvement in the academic performance of girls compared to boys. Means higher improvement in academic performance of girls of compared to boys. So we are using greater sign here, but it is giving a direction, like we are going towards boys or towards girls. In this directional hypothesis, uh, it specifically predicts that girl will show a greater improvement in academic performance compared to boys. So due to the new teaching method, it provides a clear direction for expected outcome. So here we are getting expected outcome. What outcome? We are getting like girl's spelling is mistake is there. So girl is have a higher improvement in the academic performance when we are comparing with the boys. So same as if we go for a non-directional hypothesis, the new teaching method will have an impact on academic performance of boys and girls. So here what we see, there is no direction whether boys are having higher improvement or girls are having high improvement in comparison of boys and girls. So this here girl and boys are equal, so we are not getting any direction. So this kind of hypothesis is non-directional, and this kind of hypothesis is a directional. This is as simple as. Now see what we are reading last previous classes. We have understood about variables, we have understood about hypothesis, and the final part of hypothesis is hypothesis testing. After that we will understand type of errors like alpha errors and beta errors. We also call false positive and false negative in hypothesis testing. After that, like we are going in a process, research process. So we will understand, we are in a first step of research process, where what we do, we formulate a problem, we understand a variable, we write objectives. So this is all come in first step of a research process, that is formulation of research problem. So this is all the part of the first step of a research process, that is formulation of what? Research problem. Are you listening?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. So now what is hypothesis testing? Hypothesis testing is a statistical method, right? What we do in a testing of hypothesis, statistic method we use to make inference about a population. So based on a sample, like we cannot take up entire population to analyze the data, or to take or to collect the data. It is difficult to collect data on population. So what we do in a research, we do it on a sample. So we collect the data from a sample. It involves two competing hypotheses: what? The null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. We always measure null hypothesis, and on the outcome of a null hypothesis we do a conclusion, right? So null hypothesis represent H0 and the alternative hypothesis HA or H1. These hypotheses are a statement about population parameters. Mean these are the statement it represents a parameter of population, such as population mean or proportion. Null hypothesis, this is the default hypothesis that there is a no significant effect or a difference in the population. What it says, null hypothesis, there is a no effect or a difference is in null hypothesis. It represents the status quo or the absence of an effect. There is no effect in null hypothesis. There is always the absence of effect of hypothesis and status quo. It represents the status quo, which another meaning of absence of an effect. Alternative hypothesis H1 or HA, this is the hypothesis that we want to test. We always, what we want to test? Alternative hypothesis. But to test alternative hypothesis, we use statistics on null hypothesis. This is the hypothesis that we want to test. It suggests that there is a significant effect or a difference in the population. So when we use statistic methods on hypothesis in a hypothesis testing, so when we receive an outcome, so there are two type of outcomes comes. First is in hypothesis testing, there are two type of errors that occur. First is type 1 error. It is also called false positive. This occurs when we reject the null hypothesis, right? When it is actually true, when a hypothesis, when we use a hypothesis, null hypothesis, and in outcome it comes true, it actually true during a calculation, a mathematical statistical calculation, we call it false positive when we reject the null hypothesis. In other words, we conclude that there is a significant effect or a difference when there isn't one, right? So the probability of making a type 1 error is denoted as alpha. Remember these things. And it is also called the level of significance. So the question can come in your examination from the type 1 error, like what are the other name of type 1 error? So they will give you the option false positive. And what we do in type 1 error, we reject the null hypothesis when it is actually true, right? And they can also ask you that there is a significant effect or difference when there isn't a one. So the probability of making a type 1 error is denoted as alpha. How you denote the type 1 error? So we have to give an answer. We denote it as a alpha. So, and it is also called the level of significance. Type 2 error, false negative. Type 1 error, false positive. What we use word for this type 1 error? False positive. And in we use false negative. This occurs when we fail to reject, like the null hypothesis when it is actually false. So when we measure, when we test the null hypothesis and it actually false, it is not giving the right calculation and it is false, we always use word, what word we use? Fail to reject. We do not use in research, we do not accept or such kind of word. We always use reject or fail to reject. Means it is false, still we are fail to reject it, and this is called type 2 error, false negative. In other words, we conclude that there is no significant effect or a difference when there is one. So the probability of making a type 2 error is denoted by beta. So type 1 error is alpha, type 2 error is beta. Type 1 error false positive, type 2 error false negative. Here we say that alpha is also called level of significance, right? So what is level of significance? We understand the significance level denoted as the alpha is the probability of making a type 1 error. It is said by the researcher before conducting the hypothesis. So a question can come in your examination that the what to said before what researcher said before conducting the hypothesis. So they can give you the option type 1 error, level of significance, level of confidence, or power of a degree. They can ask you anything. So just remember this thing. Always a researcher, what do they always do a means they always set significance level before conducting the hypothesis, research before conducting the hypothesis test and represent the maximum acceptable probability of incorrectly rejecting the null hypothesis. Common significance of levels include 0.55% and 0.011%. See, this 0.5 means 5% and 0.01 is 1%. These are the significance. When we start writing hypothesis or we create hypothesis, what a researcher do, he tries, means if I use statistics to conclude it, to take a outcome from my hypothesis after calculations, what will be the chances of a mistake? So the chances of a mistake is 5%, means my research is 95% true, 5% may be wrong. And same here, 1% means this is level of significance or level of alpha. You use 5%, 1%, 10%. This is the percent of a mistake in your research, chances of wrong. But the choice depends. So if you want to means what kind of level of significance you want to use in your research, it depends on you. So this is significance of level alpha, and we denote it by alpha sign, and the percentage we use as a label, like 0.05 means 5% and 0.01 is 1%. Some people also use 0.1 means 10%. Another thing is power of a test. So the power of a hypothesis, we denote it 1 minus beta. The power of a hypothesis test denoted as 1 minus beta is the probability of correctly rejecting the null hypothesis when it is false. In other words, it represents the ability of the test to detect a true effect on difference in the population. The power of a test is influenced by several factors, including the sample size, the effect size, the magnitude of the difference you want to detect, and the chosen significance level. Right? This is the power of a test. So what steps include in hypothesis testing? First, what we do, we formulate hypothesis, clearly state the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. After that, what we do, we collect data, gather a sample of data relevant to hypothesis. Next step in testing of hypothesis, choose a significance level. What you do, you choose a significance level, like what percentage of significance level you want to use in your research hypothesis. Conduct the test. Use a statistical test. Different tests are there for testing a hypothesis: t-test, chi-square test, z-test, to analyze the data and calculate a test statistic. Make a decision. Now what you do to make a decision, compare this statistic to a critical value. So critical value is that value which is already set by the researchers, and where you fall after your result, that gave you the exact outcome. So calculate a p value or a critic when you test, and to compare it with the critical value, it gives the outcome. If the test statistic fall in the rejection region, it is a curve, right? You will understand when you will go further for your research. Otherwise, fail to reject it. So make a decision on depend on your calculations. Draw a calculation based on the decision in step 5. Make a conclusion about the null hypothesis. Report your findings and discuss their implications. So these are the 5 steps included in your hypothesis testing. See, there is a a chart where we understand about type 1 error and type 2 error. See, if you there is a null hypothesis, it is also called status quo, right? Means there is no effect. So between two variables, that is called null hypothesis. So when your hypothesis is true, null hypothesis is true, and still you are rejecting it, means this is type 1 error, alpha error, reject a true hypothesis, and it is also called as false positive conclusion. When your null hypothesis is true and you are not rejecting it, you are right, you are accepting it, means accept what we will not use it, but we are failed to reject it. we use do not on the place of do not, what we will word we will use, fail to reject it. Means your null hypothesis is true and you are failed to reject it, means your conclusion will be correct, it will be ready to generalize, right? When your null hypothesis is false, right, and you are rejecting it, then again it is correct, you are correcting, your calculation is correct and it is ready to generalize. But when your hypothesis, null hypothesis is true and you are failed to when your null hypothesis is false and you are failed to reject, that is called type 2, type second error or a beta error. So you do not reject a false null hypothesis, and another name is false negative hypothesis or a conclusion. So we have completed the step 1. Sorry, we are in the research process, we are understanding research process, and research process we are in a first step. In a first step we just understand about variables and hypothesis. Now we are starting the first step. So we haven't we went through this first step, that what we do in first step: literature review, formulation of objective, identifying research variables, and measuring skills, formulating hypothesis. I hope you are not sleeping.
No, no, sir.
All of you. So now in first step, first thing is steps in the formulation of research problem. So what we do, there are 7 steps include in formulation of research problem. First is identifying a broad field or a subject area of interest to you. You should identify broad field or an area of subject where you are keeping your interest. This is first step of formulation of research problem. Second is dissect the broad area into sub areas. When you identify your broad area, subject area, what you do, you dissect it in a sub areas. Third step, select what is of most interest of you. From sub areas you choose your most interesting area, right? From there you use step 4, raise the research question. Now you formulate a research question, kind of a research questions, and formulate objective. After raising your questions, what you do in fifth step, formulate objective. Assess your objectives. Now when you formulate your objective, now assess it, review it, and double check it. So these 7 steps are there in formulation of a research problem. Questions will come from this things only, right? So remember this, read it. Now second thing is consideration in selecting a research problem. When you go for a selecting or creating research problem, what consideration should be there? First is interest. Definitely without interest you will not do anything. There should be a magnitude, having sufficient knowledge about the research process, right? So if you do not have a knowledge about research process or a magnitude, you will not complete it. Measurement of a process, if the researcher is using a concept in the study, should make sure to be very clear about its indicators and measurements. When you have decided, you have chosen your research problem, you have created your hypothesis, so what kind of a measurement of a process should be there, that you know. Level of expertise, how many research papers or literature you have went through, that should be there, right? Relevance should be there, select a topic that is of a relevance to as a professional. Availability of a data, means you have taken a such kind of data, there is a no availability, and you are going for a research for such kind of a data, then it will be very difficult to you to conduct a research, and until unless you are not having a support of a big university or a sponsor or a fund. So, and last one is ethical issues. Formulating a research problem is the ethical issue involved. So these are the considerations in selecting of a research problem. Now during formulation of a research problem, extensive literature review survey is always required. Once the problem is formulated, the researcher should undertake extensive literature survey connected with the problem. For this purpose, the abstracting and indexing general and published or unpublished bibliographies are the first place to go to academic journals, conference proceedings, government reports, books, etc. must be tapped depending on the nature of the problem. Formulation of objective: when you have decided your area, now you are coming and research problem, now you will finalize your objectives. So objectives are the goals which you set out to attain your study. Objectives can be written under two headings. What are the two headings? Main objective or aims, sub objectives, right? So example of main objective: the main objective is to explore the relationship between the use of modern teaching and techniques. So these are the variables. And student performance. Modern teaching techniques and student performance are the variables. So what you are doing? You are exploring. Your main objective is exploring, right? What is your so it may be a exploratory research, and you are trying to trying to give a relationship between these, right? And what are the sub objective? So the sub objectives are as follows: to find out the extent of relationship between the use of modern teaching, right? What we do, we use different kind of action verbs in sub objectives kind of objectives: expand, to compare, to study, right? This kind of things we do in a sub objective types. So this has completed our hypothesis testing and first first step. Any questions regarding this? Hello?
No, no, sir.
Busy हैं? All are few busy.